Hello, I've recently bought a chainmail hauberk and I want to make a video where we see how difficult it is to put on, how cumbersome it is to wear and what you can and can't do whilst wearing it. Before doing that, I want to make a short video talking about making chainmail. I've made a fair bit in the past, never enough for any kind of armour. Little scraps like this and this, and going to discuss why I've decided I'm not going to be able to make my own chainmail, what some of the difficulties are and some of the things you think about if you want to make it. And also we'll discuss why you need to wear a pair of these if you're going to handle it very much. Here is a coif, a headpiece, and it's so terribly greasy that if you're not wearing gloves, you'll never get it off yourself, and you definitely don't want it anywhere near your good clothes or your hair. Here goes. First things first, and that's tools. I use two pairs of ordinary pliers, one pair slightly larger than the other. That's not essential, but I find it nice to have the larger pair as the one you mostly hold down and brace a ring with, and the other one being smaller, it's a little bit nimbler to get in there and manoeuvre things around with, and talk about the size a little bit more later. Some people use tools made for the job, including to put the rivets through some types of rings. I don't think they're made for rings quite as strong as these, and we'll get onto that in a minute. What do you make it out of? I first tried using spring washers. That's only because I found out you could make chainmail yourself when I was about 15 years old, and I went straight to the nearest car supply shop and bought all the spring washers they have. I don't think other people use spring washers very often. If they do, I find no evidence of it. I've tried M6 spring washers and M8 and occasionally M10. These are made out of A2 steel, which is pretty tough stainless steel. I also have some, I think you can see the colour difference, made out of spring steel, and that's zinc plated. They are much more difficult to open, and I assume therefore they'll be much more difficult to pull apart. So if you really want a tough outfit, you probably want to use the spring steel that's zinc plated. I also bought some made out of A4 stainless steel, which is marine grade, and if you want something that's going to pull up with all kind of corrosion, that's what you'd want to buy. More recently, I have bought a pack of supposedly spring steel rings from a company, Get Dressed for Battle in this case, that supplies armour and weaponry, and I'm quite surprised at how flimsy they are. Let's compare those to a spring steel washer. You might just see this has got a square section, so there's a lot more steel, although it's of the same diameter, there's a lot more steel involved, and I found out that these are much easier to close and open, and therefore the product ultimately won't be as strong. You also get riveted armour, of course, and if you want something for reenactment, you probably wouldn't consider buying something that isn't riveted unless you don't plan to have people attacking you directly. I know when you have Roman reenactment and probably Viking reenactment, they use armour that's suitable for the period, and it's certainly not as strong as we're capable of making today. The hauberk I've bought is made out of spring steel 8mm rings. We'll look into that a little bit more in the future, and I know that I'm buying something that won't be as durable as it could be, but of course it's just as a matter of interest and testing for me. I'm not going to go out and be hit by anybody with a sword, so it doesn't have to be that durable. You can also get mild steel, various types of steel. I haven't bought the weakest, but I haven't bought the strongest either. You can also get armour made out of flat rings, and I imagine that the flat rings, they're just this, made out of wire that's been pressed, I expect. So I think the total amount of steel involved is probably the same, but I do believe that I will, with testing, find out that the thicker spring washers are more durable than these rings. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cough at the moment. And I wonder if they might even prove more durable than the riveted rings. That's something to look into. I'll mention at this point, I've seen a small piece of a video that Shadiversity made. He's somebody who makes videos about arms and armour, usually with a humorous edge. And I saw him taking a piece of mail, this sort of size, doesn't stay well on the camera, and pulling it like this with his fingers and pulling it to pieces. That's impossible with this. I'm not that weak. I'm putting everything I can into it. This isn't coming apart. It's just not going to happen. It's impossible. Spring steel, much smaller, can't get much of a grip on it. Pulling that as hard as I can. You just can't tear it. So what kind of weak armour he was looking at, I'm not sure. Perhaps that's mild steel. I suppose the point here is that the material makes a lot of difference. It's not just a case of mail is mail, regardless of what it's made from. Of course, it was originally called mail. Most sources would agree. Chainmail is a modern term, and it was most often spelt M-A-I-L-L-E. Not that that matters very much. I tried making a video briefly yesterday where I tried the different types of rings, and I put together 10 rings and timed it. And that turned out to not be very effective because the amount of time it took to put them together varied more on me talking or not at the time. And I also did find though that these rings, the lighter ones that I bought that you're meant to make mail out of, weren't much quicker to use than the others. So overall it was from about 4 minutes to 7 minutes to put 10 rings together, and there's not a lot in it, so I don't think you have to worry about time. One thing that's definitely true is that the smaller rings, the 6mm compared to the 8mm, are much easier to open and close, so it will be quicker to use a certain number of rings with the M6 6mm, but the 8mm being larger will cover more volume as you go. So I am as yet unsure whether it's a little bit quicker to use the 6mm or not. I expect this 8mm stuff to be tougher than the 6mm because the steel is wider, there's more steel there. You could say that the 6mm has smaller gaps between the rings because the rings are smaller. I don't think there's any advantage in that really. If there's any advantage in this, the 6mm, it's because it would be easier to wear, and part of the reason I was making a vest is I thought it would be useful to wear if you're going to spend a lot of time somewhere like London where people often tend to want to stab other people. I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous. Really, I'm only saying it because I tend to go to places on the very rare occasions I go to London where you wouldn't be out of place wearing a chainmail vest. I'm not really suggesting people go around London wearing a chainmail vest. I'm suggesting you be very careful if you go to London. Let's have a look at the patterns you can use. 4-in-1 is the most common, and that means 4 rings go into each other ring. These are all made with 4-in-1. You get lots of other patterns, but in my experience they're all ornamental, such as this. And here's an example of some more practical patterns, but the 8-in-1 that simply doubles the amount of rings is obviously going to be stronger, but you won't be able to excuse me, move around as well with it. A lot of the time when I found videos about making mail, it's people making it to be ornamental or to be part of a costume without any mind to actually make an armour or protection. It's not to say there aren't other videos out there as well. One thing I'm unsure about is the advantages of closing rings while making the mail. And a lot of people, such as looking on, I think, wikihow.com, the website, it will tell you to get a lot of rings, close one, open one, close one, open one, and then put them together. Now it's very easy to make a line of rings like that, one open, one closed, etc. But when you get into multiple rows, the advantage, you start to lose it. You could still, in theory, close every second ring and work out how to put the male together that way, but I think it takes so much effort and concentration, it's easier to just open your rings and just go ahead, with the exception of when you're putting a first row together. Now, I've been talking for long enough, haven't I? So I'm going to carry on talking for a little bit while I begin putting some together, and I think it's a good idea to show how you make a bit of it. At this stage, I'm going to close every second ring, and I've just realised I would do really well to put on a pair of reading glasses for this. And the problem I have is that when I make a little bit of this, it tends to be of an evening sitting in front of the computer with a film on and with insufficient light, and I was putting together a better lighting system for my computer and music room, but I've decided I'm not going to make much mail anymore, so I've abandoned that. But you really want good light and good vision. And that's enough to begin. I'm going to speed things up when I'm making the mail. Just wondering if there's anything else I really want to say now. I was making it for about half an hour an evening, 5 times a week, so 2.5 hours a week. And I did a rough calculation based on estimates of the amount of rings you need, and I worked out at that rate it would have taken me 20 years to put together a vest with the M6 and a tunic. I don't think you call it a tunic with mail, but I'm calling it a tunic because Hauberk's easy to pronounce, and the shorter Herbergion, I'm not sure how you say it, so I'm calling it a tunic. And a tunic with M8 would have taken me about 20 years, which is obviously ridiculous. Doesn't mean you can't make your own mail, and lots of people do. But if you want to do it, and you want to do it in a reasonable amount of time, you better be willing to have it be a primary hobby of yours for a while and put others onto hold. And you really need to put some time during the day, perhaps get outside and do it in the sunlight, and make sure you treat it almost like a job, and you spend 10-15 hours a week on it, and then you could probably complete, I would say, a piece of armour in a year. Impossible for me. I have too many other things I want to do. It's not a high enough priority. Now here you're seeing how you often have to take a second pass to close, I keep going the wrong way, to close a ring quite adequately. And what I do when I've closed a ring is feel, and if I can see there's a jagged bit, a lip perhaps, between one ring and the other when I run my fingers on it, then I will correct that until I can barely feel it. I don't think they do that when they mass produce the armour that we buy in the UK, probably made in India, maybe in China. The one I have doesn't seem very bad. I've only had it out of the box 3 times. You've seen one of those on the introduction to this video. Haven't examined it very closely yet. We'll be doing that soon in the video. What I'm saying is you can spend as much time as you want really doing a good job and making sure each ring is closed very well. Of course, it's a different matter when you're using flat rings and you're riveting them as well. One thing you can do to make a quicker job of it is use a steel rod. I have similar steel rods would do this job, but it's not something I'm worried about at the moment. And you hang it at the top, and then you're just working on the bottom, going along, adding rings to it. And it would probably also be easier then to close one, open one, rather than do it the way I do, which is a little bit more direct. If you work at it hard and streamline your technique, I do think you could do it within a year, but not going to be much better. One thing I have discovered, and this is partly from looking at the armour I bought, but also just from learning a little bit about arms and armour, is that chainmail it's not all that good. I've referred before to my background in role-playing games and things that I used to assume about Arms and Armour, and now you have the same, of course, with computer games. And I think a lot of people, just checking audio, a lot of people believed, like me, that when you get as far as buying some chainmail for your character, that's it, you're well armoured and you're ready to go. And I now understand that chainmail is only slightly better than your gambeson, your padded armour. It's better significantly in combination, and that you've really got a long way to go. And if you want to go onto the battlefield and be ready to take whatever's coming at you, then it's plate armour you want to look at. I have seen different designs of armour, of mail armour, some oriental, some perhaps Arabic, but I think what you find is it's usually combined with something else, and you don't simply wear armour that has larger gaps in it and that's of a more ornamental style. Overall, I think that mail is going to be very good for glancing blows. Oh. Nearly over a horrible cold now, and then I'll be making some more videos. But if somebody's coming at you with an axe, then it's not going to do very much good at all. And as is widely known, I think that if you have somebody thrusting at you with a sturdy sword, then the chainmail rings are going to be pierced. And you can look at this and see, let's see, you can if I position it a bit better, the openings here. Let me turn that around, there it is. And you imagine if you thrust something into that that's tapered, it's going to start forcing it open, and that's a lot of where the strength or lack of it would come from, and that's why they rivet them as well. Thing is, this is pretty tough stuff, and this, the spring steel, zinc, even tougher steel. Might do a few more tests with that later on, perhaps see how well you can open some rings with a sword, but that's for another day. I think that's all I wanted to say. You'll be glad to hear. So I'm going to speed it up from this point, stop talking, and wait just one moment. It's almost pointless now, as I forgot to put the clock on earlier, but why not have a look and see how long it takes. Here's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 rings. Let's have a look. I will slow the video for a second to just mention that to start off with, oops, slipping with those pliers there, to start off with, you have to pick it up all the time. It's not because you want to, it's easier to have a piece and just add rings at the bottom, pull in as you go, and once it gets bigger, that becomes possible, and you don't have to turn it over and fiddle around quite so much. And you can also see here that it's difficult to keep its shape but once you've got a certain amount of rings in, that becomes a much easier matter. And here we see you can really get into a tangle, and I may have even added a ring in the wrong place. Now I'm back on track again, and I'm honestly not certain if I had placed a ring in the wrong place, in the wrong position, or if, you see, it didn't look like I had, but if it just got tangled in such a way that I couldn't flatten it out, and it felt much easier to pull a few bits off and begin again. And you see, even now, see that, getting it to sit smoothly when you've not got a lot on there isn't very easy. And that's also partly why I don't really want to go through the planning of closing one ring and opening another each time. You'll often find you want to flip it over so you're threading the rings from underneath the other rings and not from on top. At least that's the way I find it easiest. And we're just seeing now it's just starting to lie like a piece of chainmail more easily, and it really does become much easier as it becomes larger. So whatever you do, if you begin making a bit of mail, you'll find that your first 50 or so rings are the real pain, and after that everything comes together a bit more easily. Of course, you've got the stage I haven't reached where you've got a piece of mail a couple of feet by a couple of feet, and then you can't put it on your desk anymore, and that's when you've got a bit more difficulty. Right, even now you can see you have to mess around a bit to get it to hold correct shape, but just a little bit more and it would be easy enough. Right then, I think that will do. I just wanted to go far enough that I had something there that looked a bit like chainmail, which I think is just about achieved. And let's close in on the other piece for a closer view. I find it quite interesting stuff, and it's of no particular importance, but it's not going to help you if you want to do anything to do with strength sports, except perhaps arm wrestling. But this is pretty good for your fingers, and it's a good way to exercise your fingers, and it probably is good for musicians and people like that. Right, that's it then. We've had a look at different ways of making mail, different things you can make it from, and a bit of a look at how you go about it. And that's just about it for now. Now we've had a look at some of the things to think about if you're making chainmail and how you can go about making it. we'll have another look at the coif, the headpiece, and in particular demonstrate that this, particularly at the top, uses a very different kind of pattern. Yes, I think you can just about see that, almost a spiral pattern. And if you're making a full piece of armour, you have to take a lot of consideration to more complex things around the sleeves. And what I have learned, I knew it was heavy, but it's heavier than I thought. It's supposed to be less than 20 kilos. I'm not convinced. We'll find out in the next video. And as I've already said, it's covered in grease, so you've got to be very careful about how you handle it and what you wear with it. That's it then. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.